Hello and welcome to Reason News. Our lead story is a major policy shift that could reshape South Africa's digital landscape. A proposed change in regulations may allow Elon Musk's satellite internet company Starlink to operate in South Africa without meeting the country's strict broad-based black economic empowerment or B-BBEE ownership requirements. The Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, Solly Malatsi, has gazetted a draft policy directive proposing to relax B-BBEE licensing requirements for satellite service providers like Starlink. This move aims to align regulations with the amended B-BBEE ICT sector code, potentially allowing for equity equivalent investment programs as an alternative to the current rule that mandates at least 30% ownership by historically disadvantaged groups. For those unfamiliar, Starlink promises high-speed, low-latency broadband internet, particularly in remote or underserved areas. It's a game changer for digital access, relying on a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites. But in South Africa, its entry has been consistently hampered by the country's B-BBEE legislation. This critical framework aims to address historical economic inequalities by promoting ownership and management control by historically disadvantaged groups, primarily Black South Africans. The Electronic Communications Act, which governs telecommunications, mandates that companies operating for commercial purposes on a provincial or national scale must obtain operating licenses from the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, or ICASA. A key requirement is a minimum of 30% equity ownership held by persons from historically disadvantaged groups, including Black people, women, youth, and people with disabilities. The ministry argues that this policy shift will attract foreign investment by reducing regulatory barriers, encourage market participation from global tech firms, and crucially maintain empowerment goals through alternative economic contributions. They cite research suggesting that a 10% increase in broadband penetration can yield significant GDP growth in middle-income countries like South Africa. Here's a video from Newsroom Africa, who spoke to the editor-in-chief of Stuff magazine, Toby Shapshak.
What's happened is a very interesting shift of policy. So just to explain things, BE requirements generally require if a foreign company can't sell a percentage of their local subsidiary or their local company, such as Microsoft or Google or Ford or BMW or Toyota, they have what are called equity equivalent investment options. So, the motor industry started a fund that employs businesses in that industry and supports small businesses, or you build some infrastructure or you pay for some training. These have been the traditional workarounds for big tech firms. When it comes to telecoms and broadcasting, it's very different. The regulations and the laws that govern ICASA in terms of the telecoms industry and ICASA in terms of broadcast very clearly insists that the ownership portion of BE regulations has to be fulfilled. So the company has to be 30% owned by previously disadvantaged people. What Communication Minister Solly Malatsi has done is suggest to ICASA that, in line with a broader understanding of this, I'm just explaining the background, which is called the BE or BBEE ICT sector code, that ICASA is being directed by the political principle to look at this legislation for the broader tech industry, and instead of having to have ownership, they could do these equity equivalent investment programs, as Malatsi called it in the government gazette notice on Friday. So basically, it's a bit of common sense is coming through. You have two very competitive parts of our economy and of very high very high cost industries in terms of telecoms and broadcast. And what's happened globally is that these big businesses are consolidating and competing increasingly against everyone. So, if you're competing against a telco, say Vodacom, they're actually owned by Vodafone. at one point the largest telecoms company in the world. I think they down the ladder a little bit, but all of a sudden it makes a big difference for a company like MultiChoice, which is competing against Netflix and Amazon Prime when it comes to its Showmax. Disney Plus, HBO, for it to partner with Canal Plus is a strategic advantage for an own-grown, self-made South African company like MultiChoice. I think it's a good move, and the same thing for bringing in an international service provider. No, big tech firm is going to sell 30% of their subsidiary to take on the South African market. In global terms, South Africa is tiny. We're at often a rounding error for these big companies. We think we're really important, and obviously we are. We don't question our exceptionalism. And I think part of the reason that Cyril Ramaphosa has suddenly got all of South Africa's backing is because if you're going to trash talk our country, that's our job, so we stand behind him. It's our job. I often joke only Jews can tell Jewish jokes, or other Jews joke that, so it's been a good thing for us in terms of our country.
Elon Musk has publicly criticized South Africa's B-BBEE rules, claiming they have prevented him from operating in the country. With the proposed change, Starlink could finally launch its services here, offering high-speed internet access to millions of South Africans, especially those in rural and underserved areas. The government's rationale is clear. By easing regulatory barriers, it hopes to attract foreign investment, stimulate competition, and bridge the digital divide. Improved broadband access is seen as essential for education, healthcare, and economic development, particularly in regions where traditional telecom services are scarce or unreliable. Minister Malatsi emphasized that the new policy would not abandon transformation goals. Instead, it would allow satellite providers to contribute to socio-economic development through skills development and economic inclusion initiatives, rather than direct equity ownership. Local telecommunications giants like Vodacom, MTN, Telkom, and Cell C have long argued that all operators should be held to same standards. They insist that Starlink and other foreign providers must comply with the same B-BBEE and regulatory requirements as domestic firms, including local ownership, control, and social obligations. The Association of Communications and Technology, which represents these companies, have called for a comprehensive review of licensing provisions before any changes are made. They argue that the current framework should be fixed to ensure a level playing field for all players in the sector. The proposed change has sparked heated debate. The economic freedom fighters have been vocal in their opposition, insisting that B-BBEE laws should apply to all companies, regardless of their origin or ownership structure. The EFF and other critics warn that easing B-BBEE requirements could undermine the original objectives of the policy and set a dangerous precedent for the other sectors. Proponents of the policy shift argue that increased competition from global players like Starlink will lead to better services, lower prices, and faster internet speeds. They highlight the potential for job creation, technological advancement, and improved access to online education and healthcare. The Independent Communications Authority of South Africa has been directed to update its regulations to support new entrants. Public comments on the draft policy are open until June 23, 2025. If approved, the new rules could be implemented later this year. ICASA has assured stakeholders that any changes will be made transparently and with full consideration of public input. The authority is also planning public hearings to ensure that all voices are heard. This policy shift could mark a turning point for South Africa's ICT sector. By attracting major global players, the country could position itself as a hub for innovation and digital transformation in Africa. However, it also raises important questions about how to balance foreign investment with the need for local empowerment and transformation. The proposed change comes amid ongoing diplomatic engagements between South Africa and the United States. President Ramaphosa and President Trump have discussed strengthening bilateral ties and addressing concerns raised by U.S. tech companies, including those owned by Elon Musk. As the debate continues, all eyes are on ICASA and the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. The outcome of this policy shift could have far-reaching consequences for internet access, competition, and economic transformation in South Africa. The proposed easing of B-BBEE requirements for satellite providers like Starlink promises to boost investment, enhance competition, and bridge the digital divide. But it also raises important questions about transformation, local empowerment, and the future of South Africa's ICT sector. We will continue to follow this story as it develops and bring you updates from Parliament, ICASA, and communities across the country. Until next time, stay informed, stay updated, and stay curious.